Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is Ashley Jablow, who is the founder of Wayfinders Collective and creator of Life Design School, a creative studio for people in career and life transition. She's a seasoned facilitator, speaker, coach, and design strategist. Ashley blends design thinking, something I hope we'll talk about today, and innovation, emotional intelligence, and creative tools to spark clarity and action for teams and individuals navigating change. She's also the artist and author of 100 Days of Designing My Life, a guided journal series for reflection and reinvention. Welcome, Ashley. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Before we dive into nonprofit leadership-y things, would you share a little bit about yourself personally so we can get to know you as a whole person?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so thrilled and looking forward to our conversation. Yeah, so in a brief nutshell, I think what will probably resonate most with leaders listening here is I have always wanted to do mission-driven work. I always knew I wanted to have impact through my work. I was not, I say this with as little judgment attached to it as I can, but I never wanted to just make widgets. I always wanted to do work that had meaning for me, but even more so for the world. And, that has taken a lot of different shapes and forms over the years. I started my career in the nonprofit sector where it was really obvious what impact looked like. I moved into the world of design and innovation and even working in the public sector. And so even then, that sort of definition of impact morphed and changed. And now, as a business owner myself, I think about impact in a lot of different ways and dimensions, both through the work that I do and also as a mother and my role in the community and raising the next generation. So that is a through line for me that I think will probably land with a lot of listeners, is just that drive to always do work that has mission and vision attached to it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And that leads, sharing some of your background. I want to start actually asking you about design thinking. It's a term that was quite prevalent for a while, but I don't know how much it really made it into the nonprofit space or the just general ethos. So for those people who are like, design thinking, what's that? Right. And so that we're not just throwing it around as a fancy word, like, will you just tell us, like, practically, what is design thinking?
Absolutely. Yes. Let's get as much jargon out of here as we can, right?
Yeah.
So design thinking at its most basic is an approach to problem solving and idea generation that puts people at the center. Now, those people might be the communities you're working with in your organization. They might be your customers if you're in a for-profit organization. They might be you if you are designing what's next for your career and your life. And there are really 4 steps that you go through when you engage in the design thinking process. The first is to discover. So understanding, again, that human, whether it's you or another person you're working with and designing for. Then defining what is the opportunity here. Even more, basic, what is the problem we're trying to solve? That's something we often just jump right over. The third step is to imagine what is that future that you're envisioning. And that's something that, especially in our day to day work, we don't pause to actually imagine anything beyond like, what have we done in the past, right? So, imagine is a really important part of it. And then iterate. That's the fourth step of design thinking. And it's probably the one that, if there are any perfectionists listening out there, is the one we're most uncomfortable with. It's the one that requires us to prototype and experiment, and even more basic, just try something and then learn about what works and what doesn't. So when you can engage in those four steps, you are practicing design thinking. Congratulations. You don't need a badge. You don't need special training. You're just starting with, who am I designing for? What are their needs? What's the problem? What's the potential solution? And how can we get started right now to learn what works?
Yeah. That such a clear overview and such powerful questions in there, and you said something really important. Like, there are several of those questions we tend to skip over, but I know from experience, you can train yourself not to skip them and life gets so much easier. As a coach, people always ask me, oh, you're thinking of doing this. Should I do it? And my reflexive answer trained is, well, what are you trying to accomplish? Right?
Yeah.
Should I do this? Yeah, you answer with a question. Well, what are you hoping will happen? Right? And then if they say something that sounds like, and then I usually follow up with, well, does the thing you're thinking of doing, does that seem like the best way of getting the thing that you want with the resources you have? Yes. Then you have your answer. No? Well, then maybe not. It becomes so simple when you
Yeah.
ask the right questions. So
Yeah.
really
And let's also
powerful.
acknowledge, Sarah, that asking questions is super uncomfortable sometimes, right? Because it opens up uncertainty, it opens
Mhm.
up ambiguity. And often, you know, we can assume, looking at something like design thinking, oh, well, it's just a process. I just have to go from step A to step D or Z or whatever it might be, right? But actually engaging in it does kick up, I think of it as like kicking up a lot of dust
Yeah.
around, I don't know what the right answer is. And
Mhm.
will this work? And even, in the back of our minds, like, can I trust myself to actually accomplish this and follow through on change that's really meaningful for me? So, if I could, I would offer that there are so many questions you could ask yourself, but the one question that I always love to provide and offer, particularly for someone who wants to practice design thinking or who just wants to get started and de-risk the change, whatever it might
Yeah.
be, the question I often suggest is, what is the smallest, fastest, cheapest thing that you could do or try right now in order to learn the most? Right.
Yeah.
So I'm
Powerful.
happy to share about like some examples of what that might look like, but starting super small, right? Baby steps, inexpensive steps that are not about necessarily winning or achieving, but are about learning. That's
Yeah.
where I would really point people to start.
Yeah. I totally want to go there, but before we do, I want to highlight what you said, the can I trust myself? Cuz that is, like, in my experience, almost always there and
Oh,
almost never acknowledged. It's like
absolutely.
and it really will hold you back if you don't say that question out loud, acknowledge that you are asking, because it's like we're asking ourselves at such a deep subconscious level. We don't even know we're asking ourselves. We don't even know about that fear. And you can't address the fear if you don't even know you have
Yeah.
it, right? So I'm so glad that you brought that up. But you have this great, I think I love, so how can we deal with that? All the fears of all the questions by having a little experiment. What can we try? I love the work of this guy named Dave Snowden, and he likes to say safe to fail experiments.
Oh, I love
And
that.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's safe, right? Because it's a safe to fail, right? So, and I love having the purpose of like, the purpose is just to learn, right? Not to get anything right. And that makes it feel even more safe. So I love a good example. So what do you have for examples of
Yeah.
in any realm of a
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, I'm gonna borrow Dave's safe to fail. I think that's so true. Because the thing that's so interesting, and I'll get to an example, but it's such a like I almost want to put my hands up and imagine like a ball of yarn, right?
yeah.
Like it's such a tightly wound ball of yarn between like self-trust and confidence and risk, and like how do we reduce the risk of change? And we do that through these safe to fail experiments, right? We do that by asking and answering what's the smallest, fastest, cheapest thing that I could try. So a great example, it comes actually from my experience, borrowed a bit from my experience with my husband, who has been a career changer, and he wanted to get into restaurants. And
Mhm.
so I remember coming home one day from business school. We had just gotten married. 2 weeks after getting married, we drove cross country so I could go to business school. I basically spent the first semester of business school in a windowless team room trying to figure out like how to do math, right? The joke was that I suddenly looked at my husband one day and realized he'd grown a beard. Like how did that happen, right? So I remember he came or I came home from class one day and he greets me at the door and he says, "Okay, here it is. I've decided what I'm going to do with my career." And I'm like, this is amazing. This is well before I was trained as a coach, well before I knew any of this. And he said, I'm like, tell me what it is. And he says, "I want to open up a restaurant." And I I had a very similar kind of immediate laugh, just like you did, Sarah.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? You are a data analyst. Like I have no, like these words don't compute to me, right? So, okay, I will say he did not immediately open up a restaurant. But
Yeah.
here's a great example. Like let's say you really love food, you love hospitality, and you have this inner dream of one day owning a restaurant. Well, nobody would say it's a good idea to immediately plunk down like your entire life savings and sign a 5-year lease. And like, if you haven't even really spent much time in the kitchen, right? So, what is the smallest, fastest, cheapest thing you could do to learn right now if this is a path that you want to go down? Well, one way you might say, well, I've always wanted to go to culinary school. Okay, well, so it's a great step, but is that the fastest, cheapest, smallest thing you could do?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah.
What about like a weekend cooking workshop? Maybe for some of us, that might be the next thing. What about like opening up that cookbook that's been sitting on your shelf for the last 5 years, flipping to a recipe and trying it,
Right.
right? Do I like cooking? Do I
Right.
like standing in the kitchen? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, can I take the heat of baking, of roasting, of sautéing, whatever it might be? Right? So baby steps as both a way to learn, right? To say, yes, I liked cooking that recipe. Okay, now I am going to sign up for that Saturday morning workshop, right? And I'm going to keep going. And also to the point about self trust, you start to build confidence in yourself through these experiments. Like, I loved baking that recipe. I'm going to sign up for this workshop. I love that workshop. I'm going to go to cooking school. Like, right? You build
Yeah.
confidence in yourself. You build trust that you can follow through on this vision while also reducing the risk of the action that you ultimately take.
Yeah.
My husband did some of that, and also we kind of learned along the way.
Right.
Very very, it's a very personal thing. Like we walked the walk of trying this out, and we have a lot of good stories. That's
It's
for sure.
I love that example so much, richness in it. And it's so real. Like we're often like, I want to do this big thing. And then people start barreling down a path without, taking some baby steps. It reminds us of another great saying. It's Jim Collins' Great by Choice. I actually don't
Mm.
really like his Good to Great book, Story for Another Day, but I really think there's some great lessons in Great by Choice. One of which he calls fire bullets, then cannons. So, like the open a restaurant's the cannon approach, but like first we should just like send some little bullets, see if we can hit a target, and
Yeah.
before we invest everything in that biggest, boldest action.
I love that.
And
And
go
maybe
barreling
even
down.
before bullets, why don't we throw some spaghetti,
Right.
right? And just like see.
It's just I love it. I love it. I love it. So you're kind of like we talk about innovation, we talk about design. So much of this we're talking about dealing with change, really. And how do we initiate change and facilitate change and make change come about? And I know you have like a specialty like in our personal lives too. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like how do we initiate change in ourselves? Whether, our nonprofit leaders here, maybe they're thinking about changing careers, changing position inside an organization, becoming a nonprofit leader, switching organizations. I was joking on another interview, like every nonprofit executive director is asking themselves, like, do I really want to do this job multiple times a week? And sometimes they should be, answering that question seriously, and other times that's just venting. But talk us through, like, how do we
Yeah.
use these kind of design thinking and business practices on ourselves for our own
Mm.
change management?
Yes, I love it. And it's really interesting. I'll just name the word innovation. It feels like such a big, again, kind of jargony word. If you look at the root, the Latin root of the word innovation, one of the definitions is change, right? Innovation is really, broadly about change. And we are actually facing change everywhere all the time. And it's actually quite like in Mother Nature, or, the seasons change, or babies learn how to walk, or we get older, right? Like change is actually, it's happening all the time, and it's actually quite neutral. It's our relationship to that change that is often charged.
Mm.
And so I think, this is true actually inside organizations if you're leading a change effort as much as it is change and transition that you might be going through or preparing for. You mentioned asking questions, and
Yeah.
I think reflection is one of the most important things that anyone can do at any time, but
Yeah.
particularly as you are facing change and navigating change. Like really pausing before you jump into doing the change, like really examining how you are relating to change in general and to the specific change that you're designing. So, if I may, there may be like 4 areas I would point people to be thinking about and doing some reflection for, right?
Yeah.
So the first would be like if you think about the change that you want to make. Let's say you're thinking about, do I want to change careers or change fields? The first thing I would encourage people to reflect on is just like, what is your level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction with your current state, right? A lot of
Mm.
people who are looking to change careers are pretty unhappy. So that's often an easy one. But sometimes it's interesting to even note if you feel maybe even a bit ambivalent about your current state. I don't know that you have to be unhappy to make change, but sometimes there are almost unintended benefits of being stuck, for example, which is a weird thing to say. But I think it's important to start with really reflecting on what is my level of satisfaction with my current environment, my current role, my current, organization or team, just as a baseline. Then I would encourage you to reflect on, well, what is the future that you imagine for yourself? Like, can you see that vision in that crystal ball? Is it clear? Or maybe is it a little murky? Like for a
Mm,
lot of people, it's, I know I don't want this, but I don't know what I do want, right?
yeah.
And
Yep.
so naming that, it's not good or bad, but just if you recognize through reflection, oh, actually, I don't really know what I want, that can be a huge, like, we all wish for that arrow to come down from the
Right?
sky being like, go this way, right? But if you're not sure what that future is, go that way. Like, start to get curious
Yeah.
about the future.
I love
Another
that.
area to
It's like,
reflect
I just
on.
wanna
Oh,
add to
yeah.
that for a moment because I think that's so, is it the big arrow? Like, I saw, like, if you're not sure, the big arrow says explore.
Yes,
Because
yes,
then
yes.
it's a type of travel that isn't
Mm.
necessarily a destination. So, just
I
wanna offer that
love that,
visual.
Sarah. Absolutely. It's like the arrow is saying go find examples of who or what inspires you and
Mhm.
start to dream that that could be yours, because it
Yeah.
it can be, right?
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
last two kind of areas of reflection I'd encourage people to think about is the path you need to take to get from where you are today to that future state. So for
Mhm.
some people, they may say, I know exactly what I want going forward, but I have no idea how to get started. Well,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting area for reflection. And that arrow coming down from the sky would probably say like the safe experiments, right? Like
Yep.
try things and see
Yeah.
where it moves you.
Yeah.
And then this one is especially kind of sneaky. It's a bit like self-trust in that we often don't want to talk about it, we don't want to face it. But I would really encourage listeners to spend some time reflecting on the perceived or real risks associated with
Mm.
making the change,
Yeah.
right? Like, what do I have to give up? What are the trade offs? What are the financial costs, the reputational risks, even the opportunity costs, right? Of
Yeah.
like, if I leave, then, I see this in corporate a lot. People will say, well, if I leave, then I lose my stock, right? Or I
Mm,
don't
mhm.
vest. It's like, well, it's important to name that whether or not that appears like a big risk, right? A big cost,
Right?
there's a cost associated with the change, right?
Yeah.
So reflecting on like what are the costs? What are the risks here? And
Yeah.
again, with all of these areas, doing it without judgment as best as you can. It's all data. And
Yeah.
once you have that data, then you can start getting curious about, okay, what are the answers I'm seeking in service of me making my next move, or knowing what the vision is, or acknowledging that this change has risks and I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Such clear steps. I love the visuals, and I love that you said, perceived risks. And I'm wondering, as someone in my own process, and admittedly, like, I've always kind of been like a change junkie. Like, I'm not, and it's not that I go trying to change, but change has never scared me. It probably helps that, like, my parents both had like multiple very diverse careers, like 4 or 5, different lives, and so it was just like, "Oh, you haven't done all these different things." Like, that was normal to me. So I don't struggle with change, but I love it. I love thinking about how we bring people along with change. And one of my processes, when I get to those, what are the risks? What are the perceived risks? Is I like to start, like, pulling apart what are the hard risks, and then what are the things that I'm thinking feeling are risky but maybe aren't really so risky, because those are kind of in my control. And I'm wondering what, I bet you have some thoughts in there, like, how do we deal with those perceived risks? Or I had a coach once say, like, what are you assuming that might not actually be true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I mentioned I went to business school. So I love a good 2x2. And I have this kind of 2x2 in my brain of like plotting risk according to both like how real dangerous it is, quote unquote, like, taking your life savings and going to the casino, right? Like big danger, red flag, don't do it. And then those risks that are like actually helpful risks, right? So imagining that along one axis and then along the other, like the size of the risk. Like they're the really big ones and then they're the little baby ones.
Yeah.
And somewhere along there, finding risks that are helpful, productive, safe, actually, and also small, right? Not surprising.
Mhm.
That's the quadrant I'm most interested in.
Yeah.
And yet it's the big dangerous risk that everyone sort of assumes we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, I often go back to there is risk in everything.
Yes.
And if you are not making a move and you're unhappy or you feel stuck or you're wasting your potential, there's a risk associated with staying where you are too.
Yeah.
And I think it's often valuable to consider what is the cost of staying where you are as opposed to the cost of trying something,
Yeah.
right? And how do you balance again, real risk versus perceived risk, or the risk
Yeah.
of moving forward versus the risk of staying
Yeah.
stuck.
And it's easy. I want to hone in on this because in the nonprofit space, a lot of nonprofits, they think they're being safe by not taking risks. But as you said, they're actually, assuming risk. And I'd rather be in control of my risks than have risk happen to me, I like to nurture this. But I want to just hone in because I have an insight on why does this happen in the nonprofit space so much? And
Mm,
I think it's twofold. One, there's this message of we have to be good stewards of donor money, and that
mm,
means not taking risks with money, which is not true for all the reasons you just explained. But I think the bigger reason is we often leave risky decision making to our boards, our board members, and our
mm,
boards do not experience the consequences of their decisions. And so to them, they perceive often that taking no action is safer. And but then when whatever the bad thing is going to happen from not taking action, they don't experience pain or suffering. The staff
mm,
do. So it's a dynamic that actually encourages risk. And for a topic for another day, but that's why I really encourage leadership teams, staff to make decisions and really not have the board make decisions, or to
mm.
broaden it that whoever is experiencing the consequences of the decisions is usually best suited to play a leading role in making those decisions, right? Because if we
Oh,
don't,
wow. Yeah.
it's a system that is prevalent in the nonprofit space and kind of, I don't want to say it reinforces, but you do learn over time individually that taking no action can be risky.
Yeah, yeah. Boy, I just have to I'm fascinated by that. And that both resonates with my experience working in nonprofits and also now as a facilitator and coach with leaders inside nonprofit organizations. And it just makes me wonder, and I don't have an answer for it, but my innovation, my design thinking brain switches on, my love for post-its and making things visual, so because when you can see things you can do something about
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
right? And I have almost like this itch now to encourage people to map
Mm.
who is in this, like a bit of a stakeholder map, like who is in this ecosystem and what, how relationally close are they both to the decision making and also the impact of the decision, right?
Yeah.
And ownership thrown in there somewhere. But I'm gonna
Years
think
ago,
on
I did
that.
a very mini training. I'll see if I can find it on YouTube, but I made a little chart because we did it as an exercise. We were
Yeah.
like, these types of decisions. And we had the executive director, the staff, a column for the staff, a column
Hmm.
for the board. And I just had people rate, are they impacted by the decision?
Hmm.
And then we
Hmm.
could see, I'm so with you, once you can see it. And, basically, I forget the categories of decisions I had in that example, but the board is basically not impacted by any decision pretty
Yeah.
much ever. In fact, the only decision that really impacts them is if they choose to dissolve the organization completely. They are no longer liable for it. So, but yeah, I love that idea of mapping out. I think that I'm gonna take that one and add it to a
Mm.
process of like when I'm making a decision, like who's going, who's getting touched by this decision
Yeah.
and
And
how
and
much.
even using it, like, of course, the like a racy matrix, something like that comes up. But
Hmm.
I think even using it, like, how interesting for the leadership team from an organization to go to the board and
Yeah,
use a tool like that to have an honest conversation about, look, this is the reality of how this works,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
rather, I mean, you could do it for understanding of your own, but then to actually use it as a tool to connect and to create a shared understanding of the dynamics between leadership and the board.
yeah,
Ooh,
yeah.
that gives me
I like
goosebumps. That sounds like so much fun.
that. I love it. Well, since we've arrived on a goosebumpy topic and you brought up another really important topic of like, naming the power dynamics in a decision-making process is really, really important, or at least learning to see them and recognize them, call them out, at least in your own head. Sometimes I know maybe it is risky sometimes to call them out. Other times
Mm,
it's not as risky as we perceive or feel. But let me just bring us back for a second. So, when we think about leading change ourselves or leading change in organizations, what would you say is like the one thing that of all the things we've talked about, that if people can really master that, makes all the other parts easier or not as necessary?
mm. Oh gosh. I think that the thing that comes to mind is the importance of learning learning ourselves and learning to manage ourselves, right? I mean, I remember when I first started working, I felt so clearly that there was like professional Ashley and personal Ashley. And the reality is that, some of us are better at kind of compartmentalizing, if you will, and some of us, that's the right strategy. But for many of us, we can't separate who we are as people and who we are as professionals. And I actually think that taking ownership of our own development and our own self-understanding supports us to do everything that we've talked about so much more effectively at work. So the practice of reflection, the practice of taking small baby steps, of assessing risk, right? All of that, when you can learn how to do that for yourself. There's a lovely quote by an author and coach, Jerry Colonna. He says, learning to lead ourselves is the hardest part of becoming a leader, right? And I
Mm,
think it's also the most vital part, right? When you can do all of that, you can do it in service of your team, in service of your mission, in service of the communities you support. But it really starts with us.
yeah, love it. Wholeheartedly agree. So thank you for taking us out with that note. Before we wrap up though, for folks who are like, no, don't stop. I want to hear more. You've had such, great insights, such actionable things to do. Who should be reaching out to you and what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to connect with anyone listening. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn quite regularly, so I would love for you to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. There are actually two kind of next steps I would suggest for people. And Sarah, if I may, I'm going to suggest them
Yeah.
both because I think they're really relevant. So, one is for anyone who is thinking about what's next and who wants to approach this change, whether it's professionally or personally, with intention. I offer a free on demand workshop called the Clarity Kit Workshop. We'll include the link. And it's a really important 30 minutes that takes you through naming the problem you're trying to solve, right? So, just as we said before, it's so easy to jump into solution mode. And when you can pause to name the problem you're trying to address, you actually can get to the right solution. So I would encourage anyone who's preparing for change or wants to like a change tune-up to check out the Clarity Kit. I also run a monthly complimentary salon series. It's called the Innovative Leadership Salon. Anyone is welcome to come. We do it every month, and we talk about different topics in innovative leadership. So last month we talked about change, just full stop. Next month, actually, we're talking about risk. The month after that, we're talking about trust. So if you want to join a really intimate and informal conversation, you just show up for an hour and participate, learn from your peers about leadership. I would really welcome anyone who'd like to join as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley, for being here and sharing some of your journey with us. And thank you out there for listening and everything you do to make our communities better. Take a moment to review and rate this podcast wherever you're listening to it. If you would, it helps the algorithm share it with even more folks, and or share it manually just by sending it to a friend or colleague who could benefit. And because I have been also encouraging you to get on and be active on LinkedIn, connect with Ashley on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, and give a little post about this podcast some attention in the comments. Whether it's positive or negative, we are open for all here. So thank you again, and I wish you all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.